This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. The days are getting shorter and the weather is getting colder. Luckily, this show will always be the same length and temperature, 30 minutes and lukewarm. The United Kingdom could begin distributing vaccines as early as next week. We'll see how this monumental move could be a sign for what's to come in the US. Plus, the DOJ says it's investigating a potential bribery scheme related to presidential pardons. We'll dig into the Justice Department's investigation. But first, here's what you need to know right now. The Centers for Disease Control issued new guidance on quarantine, saying that in some cases, a quarantine can last 10 days and as little as 7 days with a negative test. That's down from the original 2-week quarantine experts have been recommending since the beginning of the pandemic. As scientists learn more about the incubation period of the virus, they found most individuals become infectious and develop symptoms between 4 and 5 days of exposure. We've seen several guidelines shift or change because everything we've learned about COVID-19 has been in real time. To be clear, the CDC has nothing against a 14-day quarantine. In fact, they say that's still the best way to reduce the risk of COVID. Quarantines should apply to people who have been exposed to or infected by the virus. A growing number of the president's allies are coming to terms with the 2020 election results, but Trump is still hanging on to his baseless claims. On Tuesday, Attorney General William Barr told the Associated Press, "To date, we have not seen fraud on a scale that could have affected a different outcome in the election." Trump's legal team was quick to issue a statement back saying, "There's been no semblance of an investigation." But several contested states have already certified their results. Georgia plans to make a Biden win official tomorrow. The Secretary of State said the recount found no substantial changes to the results from any county so far, as the president takes to Twitter.
Even after this office request that President Trump try and quell the violent rhetoric being born out of his continuing claims of winning the states where he obviously lost, he tweeted out, "Expose the massive voter fraud in Georgia."
I know we've been struggling with the pandemic, but a new report says we have to do better with another crisis, climate change. By the time it ends, 2020 will go down as one of 3 warmest years on record. It's been 5 years since the world adopted the Paris Climate Agreement, but for countries to actually meet the goals, they need to wind down fossil fuel production by at least 6% a year for the next decade. The director of the United Nations Environment Program wrote, "This year's devastating forest fires, floods, and droughts, and other unfolding extreme weather events serve as powerful reminders for why we must succeed in tackling the climate crisis." The US is not currently part of the Paris Agreement, but President-elect Joe Biden says he plans to rejoin once he is officially sworn in. While Pfizer and BioNTech wait for the FDA to grant emergency use authorization for their vaccine candidate in the US, the UK decided to go ahead and get things rolling. The UK government approved the Pfizer vaccine, becoming the first Western country to do so. The government said hundreds of thousands of doses could be available by next week. So, what's next? Newsy's Lindsay Thies breaks it down for us.
Okay. The United Kingdom is the first country to approve Pfizer and BioNTech's COVID-19 vaccine. The reaction from Londoners is mixed.
Personally, I would not want to take it because I think things are happening too quickly.
I mean, people are dying of COVID, so you make that decision. Do you want to die or do you want the vaccine?
I'm pretty confident to take it. Definitely. I think myself and my family will be taking it because we need to get back to normal. I've had enough.
The 2-dose shot could start being distributed next week. In trials, this vaccine showed to be 95% effective.
This vaccine, produced and developed by Pfizer-BioNTech, meets rigorous high standards of safety, of effectiveness, and of quality. The public's safety has always been at the forefront of our minds.
UK regulators say a rolling review of data had been used to make the most of time, and that's why approval had happened so quickly, adding that, quote, "It doesn't mean any corners have been cut." The UK has secured enough doses for 20 million people, but it's unclear how many will arrive by the end of December. Priority is going to people 75 and older.
The risk of dying from COVID-19 is very strongly associated with age. Age is by far the single most important factor in terms of risk from COVID-19.
For Newsy, I'm Lindsay Thies.
When you're back, we'll talk about a little game of show me yours and I'll show you mine that a lot of people are playing right now. Get your head out of the gutter. It ain't like that. We're getting in touch with our senses during today's trending segment. From sounds to smells, you'll see what I mean. Here's what's trending. We only have a few more hours before people get sick of this. Spotify is trending because the platform just dropped their year-end roundup of the most popular songs and artists of 2020, called Wrapped. In case you're not a Spotify user, Wrapped, previously called Spotify's Year in Music, lets folks see what people around the world listen to most and, more importantly, each other's own personalized lists of their most popular songs and artists. This year, Spotify let users know the one song that helped you get through it all, which was a great way to say, here's the one song you played over and over so you didn't lose your damn mind. I really didn't think I listened to Thundercats' Dragon Ball Durag that much, but you really can't argue with the algorithm. Baby girl, how do I look in my Durag? Unfortunately, something like this isn't fun for everyone. Some parents had a tough time with their children's faves outpacing their own. What can we say? There are inequalities baked into every system. The wrestling community is mourning the loss of WWE Hall of Famer Pat Patterson, the first openly gay star in pro wrestling history. Patterson got his start in wrestling in Canada back in 1958. As a WWE wrestler in the 70s, Patterson became the first Intercontinental Champion. After retiring in the 80s, Patterson created the Royal Rumble match, the chaotic free-for-all where dozens of wrestlers beat each other down until there's only one person standing. Patterson was inducted into the Wrestling Hall of Fame in 1996. Patterson publicly came out in 2014 to some of his wrestling colleagues during an episode of the WWE Legends House.
I survived all this being gay.
Several wrestling stars expressed their condolences on Twitter, remembering Patterson as a storyteller, a fearless human, and a person who went out of his way to help young talent. Patterson died after battling cancer. He was 79 years old. There's a special kind of hubris within people who say, you know what, I think folks want to smell me. Often. Drake is one of those people. The musician is launching his own brand of scented candles under the name Better World Fragrance House in 5 cents. Sweeter Tings, Williamsburg Sleepover, Good Thoughts, Muskoka, and Carby Musk, which apparently actually smells like Drake and is currently sold out. It's hard to say when the scents will be available. Again, Drake's Better World Fragrance House site is just a landing page, and the IG doesn't really have a lot going on. Drake definitely isn't the first celeb to market his scent, but we're just glad he didn't go below the belt like Gwyneth Paltrow and Erykah Badu.
Thank you for making our debut of Badusi. In other words, Badu sell out.
I hope I'm not alone here, but I think there are limits to what we want to smell from Drake. Presidential pardons are pretty common. In fact, every president in modern history has done it, with the percentage of pardons and commutations compared to requests shrinking. We'll likely see some pardons and commutations from President Trump before the end of his term, but the DOJ has been investigating a scheme where a federal convict offered White House officials a bribe in exchange for a presidential pardon or commutation, something President Trump has already called fake news. Newsy's Shira Tarlow has more.
Pardons have become a major focus of President Trump's final weeks in the White House. Filings unsealed in federal court Tuesday revealed the Justice Department has investigated a potential bribery scheme involving presidential pardons. The heavily redacted documents show prosecutors have investigated whether intermediaries offered to funnel money as political contributions in exchange for a presidential pardon. The filings indicate that a lawyer for the convict had discussions with the White House counsel's office. It's unclear whether the conversations were part of the scheme or about the convict's case more broadly. They don't show a timeline or reveal any of those potentially involved, and no one appears to have been publicly charged with a related crime. President Donald Trump tweeted Tuesday night, "Pardon investigation is fake news," and his allies have denied any allegations of wrongdoing.
I've heard no mention of any pardons in any conversations I've had in the White House.
Shortly after the revelations, several news outlets also reported the president is weighing preemptively pardoning his children, his son-in-law, and his personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. It's unclear what crimes the president would pardon his children or other family members for.
You can't pardon someone ahead of the time that they actually commit a crime. That kind of preemptive pardon is impossible.
The Justice Department has not responded to our request for comment. Last week, the president pardoned Michael Flynn, his former national security advisor. Flynn twice pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI.
Shira Tarlow, Newsy, Washington.
If we had an end of the week quiz for ITL viewers, one of the questions would definitely be, what group of people does the CDC recommend to receive the vaccine first? With more information rolling out about coronavirus vaccine candidates and their estimated time of delivery, we're also learning more about who will get the vaccine first. It's frontline workers, in case you didn't know. According to the CDC committee, they should be first in line so they can continue to treat the sick and eliminate the spread while maintaining essential services. Newsy's Kat Sandoval spoke to frontline workers about the recommendation and their thoughts on vaccine distribution.
A key CDC committee voted Tuesday on who should get COVID-19 vaccines first. Their decision, healthcare workers and nursing home residents. But what do those on the front lines think?
I would be lying to you if I said I would run towards a vaccine arms wide open. I definitely have some trepidation around receiving a vaccine. That said, I'm a physician and therefore I'm a scientist, and so I have to turn over my thoughts and faith to science.
Dr. Stephen McDonald says we don't know the long-term health risk of the vaccine, but he adds that the risk of the coronavirus are even more harmful. He will get the vaccine, but he says he'll feel more at ease if Dr. Anthony Fauci and other leading officials in government and hospitals take the vaccine as well.
I feel that I need to do the same for patients. If their doctor isn't taking it, then why should they? And so I do feel a personal responsibility on that front to take it.
Dr. McDonald isn't alone. Nurse Jessica Gabbett-Yorko says she's not comfortable getting the vaccine, but if it's mandated, she will take it.
My concern is if we do receive the vaccine, is it going to give us severe side effects where we can't work anymore, and then we won't be able to take care of patients?
The CDC committee is recommending that hospitals stagger vaccinating their healthcare workers so entire departments aren't out due to any side effects. COVID-19 deaths linked to senior homes have surpassed over 100,000 people, and an executive director of one of those skilled nursing facilities says if it is available, he cannot wait to be one of the first to get a vaccine.
I'm very excited for this vaccine to be distributed to us, especially frontline workers, protecting seniors.
Nursing home residents will also get priority.
It is very important for them to have a vaccine. It is because they are the high-risk population.
The CDC committee is recommending these guidelines, but ultimately it will be state governors and state health departments who will decide distribution. For Newsy, I'm Kat Sandoval.
In a year like this one, hopefully we all know by now that seeing a therapist is a pretty healthy thing to do, no matter who you are. And for folks who are feeling the added weight of stress or trauma related to the color of their skin, that's especially true. National reporter Alexa Liaco has more on how racism can cause trauma and how to address that.
The moment Ryan Houston Dial stepped on this college campus, he felt at home.
This is where I want to be.
The University of Texas at San Antonio offered everything he wanted, but somehow the psychology major was left feeling empty.
I'm not feeling really well right now. I don't know what it is. I think it's more than something of just being sad.
The feelings of worry and stress only grew with the racial unrest this year and the pandemic.
My mental health was pretty low. When you have to be able to try to process a lot of these things that are going on in America and still have to go to work or go to school and act like that did not happen, I feel like you lose a part of yourself.
But Ryan couldn't accept that loss. He reached out to the Steve Fund, a nonprofit providing mental health resources specifically for students of color. Psychologists there helped him understand the emotional weight he was carrying.
Racial trauma is inherited from our ancestors who had to endure very traumatic events. And so we carry that with us.
Ryan realized he'd been living with that trauma for years.
I believe around 12 or 13 years old, it started with the Trayvon Martin case. And I remember sitting in my living room and I just started crying. And it hit a certain point to where I almost didn't even know I was crying. And as I become older, I began to more realize I was crying because when I saw Trayvon Martin, I saw a reflection of myself that being an innocent black boy, very well in his neighborhood, minding his own business, could very well lose his life.
This pain can be healed with time and support, but without that, racial trauma can have real consequences on a person's health.
And that when they go unchecked, and they can create anxiety, they can create the depression symptoms such as sadness, such as fatigue. The more that we can equip the young person in terms of helping them to understand the various dynamics that they're going to endure or likely to endure in their life, such as microaggression, such as racial trauma, the better off this young person is going to be in the end.
Psychologists say improving this situation will not only start on the individual level by giving young people better tools and resources to improve their mental health, but it will also start with conversations about dismantling the institutional racism that exists all around us, including here on college campuses.
The impact of institutionalized racism is pretty deep. Their systems, their procedures, their structures are still those old structures that were created for a very, very few at the expense of many.
But this system can be rebuilt.
It's empathy.
And deep conversations about how our nation's past is impacting the reality we live in.
It's going to take those who are unaffected to be just as enraged as those who are affected on a daily basis. And from there, we can start to have more honest conversations about what race is.
Because together, the plea for a better tomorrow cannot be ignored.
That we just want to be seen as your equal. That's all we want.
I'm Alexa Liacco reporting.
If you haven't done so already, feel free to reach out to us on Twitter using the hashtag #NewsyInTheLoop. Shout out to the person who said we need more dad jokes. Come on, man. The show is already corny enough.
We're working hard to get you the news you need.
We dig a little deeper on the stories of the day.
That's why we're here.
To help start making sense of it all.
Video games have gotten eerily good at reflecting the world around us. Humans still need a little bit of work, which could also be a pinned tweet for later, but landscapes are pretty spot on. Newsy's series Next Level looks at how games are changing the world. In this next installment, reporter Matt Pick breaks down how the virtual world of Microsoft Flight Simulator is so realistic that it's attracting the attention of real-world open-source journalists and researchers. Content warning, we're gonna get really high.
It's almost impossible to capture the beauty and complexity of reality in a computer-generated simulation. But some video games are getting pretty close. The Microsoft Flight Simulator games have been known for pushing the technological envelope ever since they debuted in the early 80s. The franchise is a pretty big deal for enthusiasts. The newest game is expected to pump an additional $2.6 billion into the PC hardware market over the next 3 years. One of the reasons the game's drawing such attention is its promise to simulate the entire world. Using satellite imagery, artificial intelligence, and a host of open-source data, Microsoft Flight Simulator has generated a high-fidelity copy of the real world, with accurate mountains, rivers, and over 1.5 billion buildings. The game's ability to recreate our own world in a virtual space could make it a useful tool in real-world investigations and research, and the technology behind it has potential for so much more.
Even on my more modest gaming computer, I was just blown away by how beautiful the world looked.
Giancarlo Fiorella is an open-source journalist for Bellingcat, an investigative outlet and Newsy partner. He uses freely accessible tools like satellite imagery and flight tracking software to research and analyze events around the world. Fiorella first became interested in Microsoft Flight Simulator as a potential tool for helping with his investigations. The idea is that each virtual landmark in the game will roughly match up with its real-world counterpart across the entire globe, which could be useful in isolated areas that aren't captured well in other datasets.
What Microsoft Flight Simulator was promising was to potentially have, hundreds of millions, even billions of buildings all around the world, not just big cities, but even the most remote villages.
Fiorella quickly found that the simulated world diverged from the real one in some odd ways. Buildings that had been destroyed in real-world conflicts are still standing in the game. And while satellite images often blur out sensitive sites like military bases, the simulation is free to add in its own buildings to those places. The game's not quite accurate enough to be used as an analytic tool on its own. The simulated AI occasionally misjudges how tall buildings should be. And the game sometimes fails to capture the spirit of the buildings it is modeling. Take, for example, our national treasure, the Washington Office Park and Business Development Center.
For a game, it's cool because it's populating it with buildings, and that's good enough. But
Right.
for open source research and for something like geolocation, which requires really high precision, the game just doesn't have that kind of accuracy in its rendering of buildings.
Fiorella does think the software has potential when it comes to natural landscapes. The virtual renderings of mountains and lakes often contain more detail than commonly available satellite imagery. And the simulation's ability to even come close to mapping out the entire world provides a good picture of how far current technology has come and where it might head in the future.
Flight Simulator for Windows 95 puts you in the most realistic airplanes available on a PC.
Flight simulators have long set standards for visuals and physics simulations in video games. In some cases, these games served as introductions to the very idea of graphics and computing.
You can't really understand today's audiovisual culture or where it comes from without understanding the history of flight simulation.
Patrick Krogan is a media studies professor in England who specializes in the cultural impact of video games and simulations.
Often, early PCs would ship with a flight simulation game for free. And they did function a bit like that as kind of demonstrator models, if you like, or demonstrator examples of what audiovisual interface can do.
While the latest game still looks great visually, the series is really breaking ground in its use of satellite imagery and artificial intelligence. The simulator provides a good snapshot of what the global surveillance satellites and machine learning tech can accomplish.
I was really impressed by how the game is able to render like a copy of the world with real weather and lighting conditions. So it makes you think, what's the next Microsoft flight simulator going to look like?
That's it for us, gang. As always, thanks for watching. We'll be back with more In the Loop tomorrow. Same time, same place. Top stories from Newsy are headed your way right now.